First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. You've seen them all for the last 30 minutes or so, but I'm going to introduce them again. Lizzie Cavazos is affiliated with Angry Tias and Abuelas. She lives in the Rio Grande Valley near McAllen, Texas, and works with migrants on both sides of the border now. Ayelet Colston lives in the Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina and is a lawyer and a voting rights activist in North Carolina and has been now for several years. And Vikiana Petit-Homme lives in Boston, is a college student there, and is not only involved in March for Our Lives, but many other social justice movements, particularly around youth issues. So there are three of the approximately 7 people in the film, and I hope that you'll have great questions for them. They're all wonderful people who can express all sorts of things about what it's like to be an activist. I've got a couple of questions for the panelists first, and then we'll quickly turn to the questions that are coming in from audience members. But just to get it going, I wanted to ask all three of you, if you could just briefly answer this, and I'll ask you one at a time. So I first met you all about 2 years ago, and I met you because we were looking for newly minted activists, people who were new to the world of political activism. Well, it's now been more than 2 years for all of you, and so you're not exactly new anymore. And my question is, how have you changed in those 2 years since I first met you and since we did the filming? And how has the issue that you're most involved with changed? And I'll start with you, Lizzie.
Thank you, Eric. How have I changed in the last 2 years? Completely. I've changed in lots of fundamental ways. I've grown to understand how critical it is for everyone to share their ideas, their thoughts, feelings about the world around them, and to basically contribute to the way that our democracy works. And we can do that in lots of different ways, but I've always almost taken a back seat, and I recognize that now. You know, it could be called indifference or acceptance. I've called it lots of different things, and it keeps changing as I continue to grow in this work. But what I've found is that if I contribute my voice and I share my needs, my unique characteristics, I'll be included in the way that we shape the world around us, the strategies we use to mitigate things like, for instance, the pandemic. My community is so unique, and we have there's so many differences in the way that we live and work and eat, and it's important that that gets shared with the people that are making those policies and legislations and strategies. And so that's been a major change, recognizing that our voices need to be heard. And how has my work changed? It's changed completely. Policies like migrant protection protocols, which is a complete misnomer. It's migrant persecution protocols. They've basically barred the asylum process for people and have made them stay on the Mexican side of the border. It's also called the Remain in Mexico policy, and it's essentially created a refugee camp at my back door. And so I've shifted, as well as my group have shifted all of their focus and attention to that refugee camp, and worked with a wonderful collective of different grassroots organizations, mainly to manage that camp. And COVID has also changed it dramatically, but we continue to do all that we can to do our mission, which is to help people give them dignity while they pursue the asylum process. It's just shifted to a different place. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Vikiana, how about you in 2 years, between being a high school student and a college student, among other things? How have you changed? How have your issues changed?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've changed a lot in so many different ways. I think mostly because when you're doing this work, you're exposed to so many different people, so many different stories, so many different struggles. And it's really hard not to empathize and just want to get more and for this world to be better for these people because they truly deserve it just for simply existing. Um, you learn so much, you know. I definitely think my work through March for Our Lives and through youth activism, I've definitely become more radicalized, you know, just realizing the potential of community, the potential of an individual, even, you know. Um, we're able to create this world and these systems and these institutions. We did that, we as humans, some with more say than others, but either way, if this was possible for us to do, then it's possible for us to change it, and it's possible for us to create new institutions, a new society, one that actually works for everybody. So while I've been exposed to many different things, some bad, I've also been exposed to so many good things, and it's helped me grow as an individual, learning, exactly what I believe in, connecting with my spirituality, and just learning more about where my morals stand and how I want to carry myself, but also just learning those tactical skills of how to build power within community, which just uh, it just amplifies the amount of things that you're going to be able to do, to be able to build those connections, those bonds with your community, to then take on a project or take on an issue and work on it together. I definitely am not the same person I was 2 years ago. And then in terms of, the issue of gun violence and how that's changed, I think y'all saw me working on actually like voting and lowering the voting age also in the film. Even in those 2 years, we've passed so many gun laws all across the country, that are saving so many lives. We did that 50-mile march, which is urging Smith & Wesson, the second largest gun manufacturer in the United States, to actually, take accountability for their actions. And we've called in other folks into that fight too, to hold them accountable. And, gun violence and gun control, I guess you could say, gun reform is a top issue now. And this was something that was not really at all talked about 2-3 years ago. So it's definitely been a journey, and there's still a lot more to go, but we're a lot closer to where we need to be.
Great, thank you. Ayelet, the movement you're involved in is just right in front of us every day, every minute. Could you just, briefly tell us how you've changed since we saw you back in 2018? And if you want to report on the great news you just got during the broadcast, that'd be great.
Well, so my life is, like everyone has said, my life has changed tremendously since I started getting engaged with this work. One difference now between now and when I actually met you, Eric, is I'm no longer quite as surprised to find myself doing what I'm doing. I was still sort of in a perpetual state of shock, I think, almost in 2018. And one really big thing to voting rights, especially in North Carolina, was, Eric, when you were filming me and what I was working on trying to defeat this voter ID amendment before 2018, I could not get a lot of help and support from a lot of sort of politically powerful people in North Carolina. Politicians did not see voting rights as a winning issue for them. So it was really just like a handful of activists who were really fighting back against the voter ID, and there's, NAACP has always, been for voting rights. There's other organizations like in North Carolina, we have the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. But outside of that, when I tried to get, I'm going to say, more kind of politically connected, those sorts of people to engage, I actually had a political consultant tell me about I don't know, close to a year maybe before I met you. Well, voters don't care about voting rights. That's not on any of our polls. Which is how I kind of, and that was just, very frustrating. Whereas since 2018, especially now, I mean, everyone's talking about voting rights, like, and they were talking about it as if they were talking about it this whole time, which, I'm glad they are now, but every once in a while I do have to kind of, I do sometimes watching that just now, I was remembering some of the sadness and bitterness of the times I felt really alone down at the legislature by myself. Sorry, it was, it gets hard, but I'm glad everyone's there now, and people are really interested in talking about voting rights now. And of course, we have always a lot going on in North Carolina. We have maybe a temporary reprieve on one single solitary issue. Since while we were watching the film, I got the news that the United States Supreme Court decided not to hear a case that had been appealed up that has to do with the current election, the one where 3.5 million North Carolinians have already voted. They declined to hear a case that would have reduced the amount of time there was for absentee ballots that have already been mailed to be received. That's not going to be all we hear on that issue, I suspect, but it is it was a little piece of good news, so I was really glad to hear that. So I'd say, that right now everyone's talking about voting rights. And I have to put the plug in when I talk about voting rights, I'm talking about from the voter's perspective. I see a lot of times, a lot of the people are talking about voting rights, but they talk about it as one political party versus the other political party. And really, when we're talking about voting rights, it's about the voters. It's about every eligible voter has the right to vote, because your vote is your voice. And your vote doesn't only count if your vote doesn't start being important if your vote happens to be the one that decides an election. It's important whether the candidate you vote for wins or not, because you've registered your opinion. And then also because politicians look at voter turnout and deciding who's, who are they going to go talk to, which voters are they going to try to persuade. So just the mere act of voting is in of itself a very important tool, even if the candidate you vote for doesn't necessarily win, even if your vote is not the one that can tip the scales one way or the other. It's important to look at it from the voter's perspective, and every voter has the right to vote. So I am glad that people are talking about it a lot more. Obviously, in North Carolina, there's a lot happening. We're really under the gun. There's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of challenges, but we have a lot of people engaged, and I'm hopeful that whatever challenges we face, that we will be able to overcome them together.
Great, thank you, and congratulations on that little bit of good news. So this is a question that came in to the chat box, which I was going to ask anyway, so I'm glad. And the question is, with so many issues at stake in the country, it can be overwhelming to try to figure out for an individual, where do you put your attention? How do you get involved? What do you do? What kind of advice would you give to people who want to get involved in something but don't necessarily know how or what issue to pick and where to start? And I guess we'll start with Lizzie.
Always me. So I think that is a really important point, and I find myself struggling with that every now and again. was talking to a friend on the phone the other day and telling her the more we work in this realm, this social justice realm, we, like Vikiana says, you start to learn more and more about the disparities that exist, and you start to hear more stories, and you recognize that there is so much work to be done. But it's important for us not to feel like overwhelmed and buried by it, but rather bolstered by it, and connect to those people that are already doing all these different types of work, because I assure you, they intersect. All of our work intersects. And so it's a matter of just amplifying each other's voices and just extending the platform and recognizing the work that's being done, and just use it to our advantage, capitalize on the fact that there is so much injustice out there, but we're all working towards the same goal. This is America, and it belongs to all of us. And we all deserve access to whatever that means. And we should all work to redefine what that means. And that's something that I'm excited about, having met so many people doing work and trying to right the wrongs that exist, and trying to, as Vikiana said again, just like say, hey, this system isn't working. We can work outside of this box. We can change the box. We can do this. And I feel that excitement happening all around me. It's like a confluence of issues, and with it, all the energies around it. So I just think we need to all just ride that wave. Everybody needs to get activated.
That's great. Vikiana, I know you've talked before about this too, especially how to get young people involved and help them, people who have a lot of passion and energy, but maybe not quite sure where to start. Any advice? And then also this idea of how things do converge.
Yeah, I think it's about like honing the sense of like reimagination, like we get stuck in this box thinking things are one way, but really in starting to engage with young folks and just anybody with conversations about, okay, hey, like what's going on in your life and what is affecting you? What issues are you facing? And what steps can we take to alleviate some of your concerns, to address your needs? And what you end up finding is like a lot of these issues are so interconnected, so much is just like a big old web of issues, that, just going at one issue and trying to fix it and point so many different spots, it doesn't work. It takes too long, and these issues are actively hurting people right now. And so just helping them engage in this process of reimagining what this society can look like, what our relationships to each other is, it really helps folks, especially young folks, to really feel energized to be able to go out there and change things. But when we try to stick it in a box and only give one way to address people's issues, that doesn't really address all their needs, because they might have a problem in terms of gun violence prevention, and I can help to address those needs. But we also need to address the fact that, they live in a food desert. There's not a lot of proper transportation. It's just so many different things that when you approach it holistically, and allow folks the ability to imagine beyond what they see right now, it really gives them the energy to go out and work. But also, sometimes it's just about finding that first step. When you have these big projects and these big issues, it's hard to know where to start. And so giving folks, simple action items to really get them started, it really helps keep folks motivated, keep folks energized and hopeful about what's to come. I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, that was great. And Ailid, I'm going to turn it a little bit, because there was also a question about from somebody in Wisconsin saying the voting rights there are going backwards. There was a ruling not like the ruling that North Carolina had. And they're asking, aside from the North Carolina decision, what gives you optimism? And I guess maybe I'll twist that a little to say, if people come to you and say, you know, why should I get involved? It's just one defeat after another. What can you say to people?
Well, first, I want to say that I agree with everything Vikiana and Lizzie said. In addition to that, all the things that we've talked about, voting rights and fair elections is on the critical path to every single one of these issues. It can be easy to start feeling like we're in the minority. No one cares about reducing gun violence. No one cares about ending just the cruelty at the border. But the truth is, we're really in the majority. And the attacks on our ability to have fair elections, and voting rights, gerrymandering, all these sorts of things, it's like a stumbling block to get all these other changes that we want. And it's, it is very hard to keep going when you have these defeats. Wisconsin, there's been a lot of challenges in Wisconsin that have been similar to things that happened in North Carolina, first. And I would say we had that one decision today, but we've had many, many bad decisions in North Carolina. I think a lot of the worst attacks on voting rights we've seen across the country, and some of the things we're seeing echoed in DC really happened in North Carolina first. A lot of dark money was flooded into North Carolina in 2010. And we've been almost like adversely occupied ever since the Supreme Court struck down a key component of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. It's been hard. And, I'm going to be real. Like, there are times that I really do feel like I'm going to lay down and cry and I can't go. I mean, you have those moments. I try to keep a brave face, because one thing I know I learned from someone who used to work at public radio. She was like, don't cry in front of the volunteers because you need them. Yeah, you can't. You have to keep everyone else kind of going, so you're not doing it by yourself. But yeah, I absolutely have those really tough moments, and I think maybe you just got to give yourself a little bit of time when you have it. It is hard, and then reach out to a friend, reach out to someone else. Look at what someone else is doing that's good. And the other thing that is very difficult is in activism, it's hard to quantify that you're having an impact. It's not like, you study for a test and then you get an A, or back when I was or something like that. So sometimes I think you have to redefine success in these smaller moments. Like, if you have a protest and it's safe and you get media coverage, then that is a success, even though you didn't get the change to the law that you wanted right in that moment. And I think sometimes you have to redefine, or I have had to, in order to keep going in my own mind, I've had to sort of redefine success. And that, okay, I was devastated when that amendment passed. And it takes some time, and we've been court battles. But you just think, okay, well, we had this protest, and it got media coverage, or we've been able to get more people involved, things like that. You have to kind of redefine success along the way, because if not, it's just too big. And just to circle back to your original question, which is sort of like, how do people pick what to get involved with? How do they start to get involved? Your local government is so much more important than a lot of people realize. There's so many issues that are impacted by city and county that don't feel like you have to do something super elaborate to have an impact. Things like if there's something that's important to you, figure out which body of local government has something to do with that issue, and then just start going to school board meetings or city council, whatever it is, and start learning that way, because with city and local government, a lot of times, once you kind of know who's who and what's what and what you need. 10 people in matching shirts at a school board meeting can have a huge impact. Like, you don't have to start a national movement to really get some sort of change that's important to you. And also, don't feel like you have to be the world expert. The fact that you live in your community and you care about the issue means that you're qualified. So, don't wait for an invitation. If there's something that's important to you, start showing up, figuring out what's going on, figuring out who else is there, and you can do it.
That's great. Thank you very much. Great advice for all of us. There have been a couple of questions that came in the chat asking about what could happen in a Biden-Harris administration, how that might change things, might not. Why don't we start with you, Vikiana? What do you think could change if, as I hope happens, next Tuesday turns out well?
I think things will change in terms of, like, we won't have Trump anymore, and Trump is a crazy individual for sure. He's caused a lot of harm. But I think a lot of things won't change. Like, institutionally, I think a lot of things won't change. I mean, we're in a pandemic, and they can't even agree that we need Medicare for all, And so while I think Trump is currently our most direct threat, in terms of our democracy, in terms of people's livelihood, I hope folks understand that Biden and Kamala won't be much better, because they still support the very institutions and the very policies that have been killing folks and causing harm to our communities before Trump was there, So as much as I would love to say that things will change, I think is just that we won't have a president who's on Twitter all the time. And at least I do think that Biden and Kamala will handle this pandemic much better and with more efficiency and care for our lives as I guess Americans. But in terms of the institutional changes that need to happen when it comes to voting, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to housing, when it comes to racial justice, they have time and again proven they are not up for the task and not up for the challenge. I mean, you have a president who was the architect of the 1994 crime bill, which is contributing to so much mass incarceration in this country. It's not enough, but it takes out the more direct threat that we are facing, the most upfront threat that we are facing.
So you don't see your role as an activist or other people's roles as activists changing in any big way?
And so I think the roles will just be not particularly. We just need to keep holding these people accountable and keep holding them up to these demands that we had, these things that we have determined as needs for our community to thrive. And so that means we must keep going out on the streets. We must keep protesting until change is made. So yeah, I don't see much difference, but I do think it will be safer for activists out under Biden and Kamala presidency over a Trump presidency.
And Lizzie, how about you? What do you think might change or might not?
I'm hopeful that overt xenophobic, racist rhetoric that's going on with the Trump administration that has become normalized will stop. People, and I agree that we will have to hold Biden and Harris accountable and make sure again that our voices are heard, that we demand the seat at the table. And I think we'll get it, but we have to demand that we're being heard, that we're not just given that token seat at the table, but that they are listening. And there will continue to have to be, I think, acts of civil disobedience and protesting but I feel that the policies and the legislation will hopefully be written with more of a humanitarian lens, I hope. And I have to hope, otherwise, I don't know, I'll go hide under a rock. I have to imagine that things will be different. That's all.
That's great. Thank you. Ayla, in terms of voting legislation?
Well, I can tell you, more broadly, Trump is a symptom of a problem. And the problem is really institutional racism, and institutional racism is at the core of really every other problem. I mean, whether you're talking about, there's a lot of environmental, I could go on about just like environmental injustice. I mean, a lot of different things. Really, in America, we have never honestly reckoned with racism in America. We just haven't. And the Russians would not have been able to manipulate, racial fears if the racism wasn't here to begin with. So that was a problem that's already here. It has been, a lot of it has been flushed much more out into the open, I think. I mean, in North Carolina, we've had straight up KKK marching again. I've seen more Confederate flags in the past 2 or 3 years than I did in my first 45 years living in North Carolina. So that is still going to be really, that's still there. And in some ways, I would say, obviously, president is very important, but Congress and state legislatures are really going to be it. Especially with the current lineup in the United States Supreme Court, if we have to have state legislatures that don't pass bad laws to begin with. So it's going to be, I think that will be, a huge hurdle, not having the zone just flooded with horribleness, so we can do our work. I think that it'll be a huge step in the right direction, but and I think that a lot of the change is going to come. It's really going to come from younger people who have been out organizing and keeping going, and whose names, people whose names we will never know. All the people who organized all the marches all summer long. The ones in North Carolina, they were all over. We took down, I've lost count how many Confederate statues we took down in North Carolina. And that came from not even the group of activists that I know. Like, I can't take, some of that was like, younger folks. And I think I do think that we're on the verge of a lot of change, but I think most of the credit for that change is really to a lot of people, a lot of everyday, ordinary people, whose names we may never know. But when I think of all the things I've learned over the past few years, a lot of what I've learned has been from, other activists who are doing different things. Maybe they had a different style, and at first I wasn't sure, all sorts of things. So I do think change is going to come, but it's, the top does matter, but that's only one piece of it. I think what I hope we will see, first off, I think we're in for a tough few months. So we just need to be real about that. We've got probably a tough few months ahead of us. But the changes that I feel kind of hopeful for, it's really all the individual activists that I have seen that I think that's what's really going to drive change.
Great, thank you. Lizzie, there's a question about your...
If you don't mind, could I continue off
yes.
of that last question? Sorry.
Absolutely.
I wanted to go off of what Ayla was saying. I definitely think I don't see any of the energy that I'm seeing on the streets coming from Biden and Kamala. It's really the community that's, building itself up and building power within itself that's causing all of these changes to be made. I think one thing that we're going to see within the next few, exponentially increase within the next few months, within the next few years, is this idea of mutual aid and, creating self-sufficient communities. I don't know if y'all have seen them, but like there are tons of community fridges popping up all over my city, in Boston, and I know all over the country. So it's like little things like that where community is starting to take up the role that government is supposed to play of, supporting communities and giving communities the resources they need to thrive. And so I feel like that's where we're going. I don't see much of that energy coming from, there's definitely a lots of talks of voting and, having to vote out Trump, but it's not like an energetic thing of, yeah, we need to vote for Biden because he's going to really get us there. It's really, let's get rid of this firsthand problem that we're doing, and then let's build community and community power to really sustain ourselves and give ourselves what we need and not have to rely on these governments and these systems that keep failing us.
Great, thank you. So turning it back to the personal just for a moment, there's a question, Lizzie, that is about the story you told of having to tell your parents what you were doing. And I think the question is a little broader, and it's about whether all three of you have had to have that kind of interaction with family or close friends and what that's like. And I think the questioner is also interested in how can you make that a positive, productive kind of conversation, not just a clash, but whether you've had experiences where somebody was pushing back on you, but you were able to somehow help bring them along too. Lizzie, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little on what your experience has been.
Well, I think, as I said, after the initial conversation with my parents, there's been lots of follow-up conversations. And just today I spoke to my father, and we've had a cold front blow in, and he says, what's going on with your friends? Which he's talking about the refugee camp. So he's gone from this person that I was afraid to tell that I was working with this population to being concerned about the people that I'm helping. It's a scary thing to expand your sphere of responsibility. Those people and the things that you think that you have an active role to play in and with. And maybe that's what my parents felt. You're in this moment where you think that you only have what it takes to take care of me and mine. But they've understood that it doesn't take anything away from me. It's actually, it's this work that I've done is so fulfilling, and I've grown so much, and it's added so much to my life. And they see that. And as I said, they've also had to expand their sphere. And I think that we can do that for everyone around us. As Alit said, once you know, and it's hard to look away. And in fact, your lens just keeps widening. And that's where I am now. And that's the life that I'm living.
Thanks. Alit, can you talk a little about how your world is, your personal interactions, family and friends?
I feel like everything has changed so much. It's hard to even, because I became so focused on what I was doing that people who weren't doing that, not even on purpose, but I was just doing such different stuff from, friends from before, that it became hard to, in some ways, almost to talk to it became hard to talk to them. I didn't have any, like Trump loving friends that I had to have a big confrontation with. I'd say I have a lot of sort of theoretically progressive friends that, we've had some conversations about, what they think is going on versus what I now know is going on. And maybe I would not have known several years ago. My world has broadened tremendously, and honestly, it's sometimes hard for me to keep my temper. When I'm like, someone like I haven't talked to, they're in a couple months, and they call up, there's some headline has gotten, they're like, well, you need to tell all those people to not be so angry, pulling down the statue, or whatever it is. And I'm like, you just don't get it. You just don't understand what's happening. And that's not, directly voting rights, but for some people, they kind of see any kind of activist, it's all together. And if there's something they don't like on TV, they call me like I had something to do, like I had something to do with it. But just who am I around? I mean, because everything I did was through my work. I mean, I'll never be welcome back in corporate America again. Um, I mean, those relationships are. I mean, but at some point I just realized those relationships would be gone, and just made the decision that was worth it. Um, and in my 40s, I feel like I could do it. Like my student loans are paid off now, and I could do it. So I'm going to do it. Like someone has to do this. But, there are times it has been challenging, but when I think about people who've come before me and how much they gave up, okay, so I've given up realistically my social life. I've given up my path back to my prior career. Um, but I mean, especially with voting rights, I mean, how many people have died? I mean, a lot. Um, people forget how many people were actually murdered in Selma. People were murdered for trying to register to vote. And I start thinking about that, and you think, well, okay, so things are awkward, and but at the same time, I feel like I've gained a lot. Like I have friends of all different ages, all different walks of life in a way I didn't before. And I feel like there was so much going on just other, on the other side of town, maybe, that I didn't know about before. That, I mean, it's been a tough transition, and I don't know where, but I've I don't know, you win some, you lose some, I guess. And I think overall, I'm such a better person, and I wouldn't ever want to not know the things that I know now, because there are so many things I did not know 4 years ago that I know now. Um, and I think that that's worth it. Um, it's not been easy, but I would do it again. Maybe I would do things a little bit smoother. Maybe I try to have a little bit more style, because now that I know what I'm doing. But I wouldn't ever go back and not get engaged, even with even with the challenges. I would never say I regret it.
Vikiana, how about you with personal friendships, family? What's it been like, and have you been able to change minds too?
Yeah, engaging with these conversations with my mom, because I did most of my work with gun violence prevention, and all of that was through like a racial justice lens. And then my recent work with like defunding the police and police abolition. Having those conversations with my mom is like very interesting, because although we like immigrated here together, at the same time, I was 6, or yeah, I was 6, and she was 26. And so that's different levels of engaging. And so the way that she views this country is very different from the way I view this country. She had struggled in Haiti, where we're from, and she came here to like get a better life with her daughter. And while she's still struggling here, she still finds it as like the better option. And it's just trying to, every conversation I have with her, I think the sole point that I try to get across is like, yes, you might be better off here than you were in Haiti, or you have less struggles, but you still deserve better. Like, you still deserve better. Like, you still do not deserve to struggle in this fashion, even if this struggle is less of a struggle than the other, if that makes sense. And so I think that's always like how I try to engage with these conversations with her. Um, we definitely don't agree on everything, but like, you just got to keep working at it, because I know I'm going to get her one day. And she does, she's getting her Black Lives Matter shirt, and she's trying to engage with me in these conversations. She's engaged in local politics and getting to know what's going on. She's going to be a poll worker for this election. So I know it's getting through to her, but it's just about, the longevity, I guess, and the endurance to keep having these conversations to help her come to where I'm at. Because, it's so much easier to like kind of absorb these informations when you're young versus when you've been conditioned to think of another way your entire life. And so it's definitely been a journey, but I can't wait till we get to that place where we're talking about abolition together. I'm really looking forward to that. And then in terms of friends, uh, yeah, I've gained so many, through all this work that I've been doing. You just meet so many people on the way, from so many different walks of life, that you just meet around this shared goal or this shared purpose of, building community, of building power together. It's truly a beautiful thing. But sometimes you have to realize that like some conversations are more worth it than others. I will not spend time with people like I do my mom, of trying to help her understand where I'm at, because my relationship with my mom is something I would like to invest with. It's something I'd like to invest in versus others. At some point, you have to put your self-care and your own needs above that, because you do not have to, like, I'm not going to have an argument with someone about my existence. That's just not going to happen. But I will talk to my mom about why she deserves better, and what better means, and what a better life could be, and what it means to have community and resources at your fingertips without having to struggle so hard. Like, those conversations are worth it. So it's just about making that assessment for yourself, really. Because the more people that you're surrounded with that understand the work that you're doing, that's more support to keep you going. Because let me tell y'all, ignorance is bliss. When you don't when you don't know much, it's easy to go on with life. But when you're connected with the work that we are doing, engaging with the stories that we're hearing, engaging with just some of the experiences that we're living ourselves, it does become a lot, and it is a lot to endure. And so having those people around you who believe in what you're doing, and also support you, it really helps you get through those times where you start to doubt whether or not things can actually happen.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and I think this is probably the last question we can take. It is for each of you, what are you most proud of looking back in your life as an activist, and what are you most frustrated by? And so we'll start with Lizzie.
So what I'm most proud of, I think, is the way that my tiny group, Angry Tias and Abuelas, 8 women, a grassroots organization that wasn't even around 3 years ago, has stepped up, saw a need, and just leaned in and leaned on one another to do the work that needed to be done, connected with organizations that were already doing the work, and said, what can we do? Identified gaps and filled them as best we can. And now with the work we do in this refugee camp, that's just like an anomaly. This isn't supposed to happen, and certainly not at our back door, and yet there it is. And we work every day with a collective, a group of organizations that, with, little to no governmental aid, is sustaining 700 people. At one time, there was 3,000 people living in tents on the banks of the Rio Grande. And we just said, no, this is not right. This is not fair. And we will see you through this. And with this collective Dignity Village, we've done that. And I'm so proud of that. And it's been the hardest work that I've ever done, but I would do it again in a heartbeat, because it's the right thing to do. What's been the most frustrating thing is that there's a refugee camp at our back door, that these policies have created this crisis, and then the people that are creating the policies are not addressing the crisis that they've manufactured. That's the most frustrating thing. And also that it took me this long to recognize my power.
That's great. That's great. Okay, Ayelet, what you're most proud of and most frustrated by?
most proud of, a couple things that people may not have heard about outside of North Carolina, but I think judges are probably the on the top of everyone's mind. A couple years ago, the majority of our state legislature that had been elected from racially gerrymandered maps tried to take over the state judiciary in North Carolina. And so about a year, we were protesting that, organizing events all across North Carolina. It was a broad coalition of people. Um, and it was, going to the state legislature, holding press conferences, trying to educate voters and everybody about why this really mattered and how it fit together. And we pretty much basically finally won on that. Um, they did slip a couple things through, but compared to what they were trying to do, and also in the same time period, um, Trump had nominated a infamously racist man to be the federal judge in Eastern North Carolina. And in Eastern North Carolina is part of the Black Belt, and we knew what that was really about. And we organized. We knew that the senators from North Carolina would not help us, so we came up with a plan where we all reached out to activists in other states and had them contact their senators, and we were able to keep him from being confirmed. One of the few judges that did not just get rammed through, and that took really, it was about a year of it was like around 2017 going into 2018 that we defeated him. And those are things that probably not everyone really knew about, but they were a lot of work. And in those two cases, we were ultimately successful. Frustration, y'all, there's so much. I'll keep you here all night. But I'll just say this: please pay attention to what's going on in elections in North Carolina. Um, I'm trying to remain hopeful, but there's a good chance that we'll have some challenges. And around this upcoming election, there's a lot of things in play, and just people following and paying attention to what's going on helps. Um, so just please continue to follow news related to elections in North Carolina. And I'm just going to stay there because we've got a lot ahead of us. The good thing is that there are now more of us. So just keep the faith, y'all.
Thank you. Vikiana, most proud and most frustrated?
I think my most proud would definitely be this past June. I helped put together and facilitated the creation of an organizing collective in Boston of over 20 Black and Brown young folks in the city. So we had organizers, activists, just people wanting to make change in the community. And we held a march early June in honor of George Floyd, but specifically with demands to defund the police. We did a survey afterwards, I guess to give y'all some background, we didn't file a permit or anything. We just went out there and we put on a march, and we relied on ourselves and our community to put it together and make everyone feel safe. And when we heard feedback, people were saying that they could really start that imagination process of imagining their communities without police. They were really able to see us, collectively take care and protect each other. That was so beautiful because police is so ingrained in our society, so that to help someone even imagine an inkling of what it could be without police and to have a different sense of what public safety means, that's a huge accomplishment. And I'm so honored to have been able to start that collective and to bring those folks together to create that powerful event. And we had so many powerful events afterwards, but that was our first, and we did it in about 4 days. And so I feel intense gratitude and just definitely my proudest moment for sure. Um, I just was able to see what community was able to do, you know, when we really put our minds to it. But not only that, when we really put our minds to, you know, not thinking inside the box and really stretching our imagination to create a new world for ourselves, a new reality for ourselves, and seeing that it's actually really possible. Because in that moment, we created a safe haven for folks. We created a place that prioritized and centered Black and Brown people, that centered Black and Brown femmes, and was all about just being together. It was really, really amazing. Um, and frustrations, I think it's just my frustration. It's just that there are people who actively know that people are struggling or going through hard times and decide to contribute to that, that they do not care, that they put their greed over others. Um, because there's no way you feel safe in that moment, you know? When you're out like for blood and for everybody, then you think everybody's out for you. And so you don't really feel safe. And so it's kind of like sad, really, because you put yourself in these positions where I don't know, it just feels so primitive to me, you know, because I feel so safe when I'm surrounded by community, by people who also feel safe. You know, when I know that people's needs are met. You know, not even like just their basic needs in terms of food, shelter, water, and all of that, but like their the needs of their soul. You know, to be able to feel good about yourself. Um, all of that. I don't know, but you know, it just frustrates me that there are people out there who have power for whatever reason that was not earned and continue to use that for their own self-interest, because I know at the end of the day that's not really in your self-interest. You know, in the long run you do not win with greed and malicious intent. If you're not physically decaying, then like your soul is decaying, you know, then how, like, what good are you after that? So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, all of you. I'm going to take a minute because there's a question about how the film came to be. So I'm just going to answer that one. It started in 2018 when the mother of a friend of mine in the town where I live, a retired high school history teacher, came and told me that she wanted to make a film and pay for a documentary film that would be about Trump and about the resistance to Trump. But the film, she didn't want to see Trump in the film. She didn't want to hear Trump in the film. She didn't even want his name mentioned in the film. And so it was a bit of a challenge, but we put our heads together along with her son. So her name's Lisa Tripp, the retired high school history teacher, who's the executive producer of the film, and her son Adam, who helped quite a bit in putting these ideas together. We finally came up with this notion that a way to do that would be to find people who had never been really politically active before, for whom something in the Trump years had thrown a switch and just made them get off the sidelines. And so that became the organizing idea for the film. Then we had to narrow it down to topic areas because we couldn't do everything. And once we figured out gun violence prevention, protecting voter rights, and immigration rights, then we could begin to contact organizations. And that's how I found essentially all of you and the other people in the film. And some people I found through each of you too. I mean, Ailid introduced us to Gerald and other connections made. So it's the way you're talking about how you've met other people that helped us too. So that's how the film came together. And I think, I still think it was a great idea for a film. And if anyone's wondering what I might do next, I'm trying to figure out how to turn this into an ongoing series. So I think it would be wonderful to be able to chronicle the lives of all sorts of different activists, regardless of what happens after this election, because as all three of you said, it can't stop, and may change a little, but it's certainly not going to stop, and it can't. So I would like to see if I can get funding to turn this into a sort of multi-episode half hours about activists in different areas and how they do what they do. Nina, can you tell me how much time we have? I've kind of lost track.
Yes, we're at 7:40 right now. So we have a little bit more time. There's a few more questions. We don't have a set end right at 7:45. So if we go a little bit over and folks are willing to stay on, we're fine. Okay.
Great, great. Well, yeah, there's a question that really I almost thought at first it was directed to me because of the language, but then I realized it was for the three of you, which is, what is your elevator speech to enlist others in your amazing work? What's that? You know, when you have a minute, when you have 3 sentences before you're going to lose them. And Ayelet, we'll start with you.
Well, I always say, in the Declaration of Independence, our forefathers said, because a lot of times my audience are people who are not engaged. I know that everyone is thinking forefathers is the cool thing right now, but I say, they said that a government of right derives its just authority from the consent of the governed. And we give that consent through voting. So voting is the foundation of our country. So it's a patriotic issue, and it's something that everyone should care about. And whatever issues people are interested in, whatever it is, whatever you care about, you have to be able to vote for people who will enact those policies and vote them out if they don't. So voting rights is on the critical path to every single issue that people care about.
Lizzie, the elevator pitch.
I have to admit that I do not have an elevator pitch. Brevity is not my strong suit. So I don't really have one. I've been able to, through the work, meet so many people that were fired up to help, and most of the people that help with the work that we do come to us. So that's something I will work on. But I believe that there is a set of rights that we all deserve, and we need to work towards that. And there's many different facets of that, many different key things going on. Then we can jump into any of those. Mine happens to be at the border with immigration rights, but there is so many causes out there that need attention. So find one, get with it.
Vikiana.
Yeah, this is a bit hard for me because I think, yes, I do work in terms of gun violence prevention, but that's all under, the lens of racial justice and achieving, I guess, racial equity and equality within this country. And so I guess it's just to say, we all have the right to the pursuit of happiness, I guess. And so can't really do that when you're worried about getting shot, whether that's at your school or on your way home from school, and in your community, like most people face in this country. And so we have the right to a freedom from fear. We have a right to be able to sleep soundly at night without having to hear gunshots, because all that is trauma. And, that's causing hurt, and hurt people. And so, if we want to talk about ending these cycles of pain, these cycles of harm that we see in our communities, we really need to start addressing a lot of these issues at their roots. And so that means meeting people where they're at and meeting their needs. That means equal access to water, to food, to shelter. These are all basic needs that every single human being should have, no matter whether you think they deserve it or not. Because we cannot all be safe until everyone is safe. And we cannot all be free until everybody is free. So really taking that in, thinking about your role in terms of community care and community healing, and community aid, and what you bring to your community, whether that just means being kind to your neighbor, because that brings something too. But just realizing that all of these issues are so interconnected. You cannot address one without the other. You can't address immigration without addressing the gun problem in this country. You can't talk about gun violence without talking about voting, without talking about corruption. You can't talk about any of these things without connecting it all around. And so we really have to go at the root of these issues, which is, like Ailette was saying, institutional racism, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy. I know these are big words, but they are so very true. And just realizing that, yes, these are big problems, but there are so many of us and we are so powerful. And if we really put our minds to it, we can really imagine and create a new society that actually, rids us of these problems, that actually centers Black and brown folks in terms of their trauma, in terms of their needs, in a way that they haven't been before.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Vikiana. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Ailette. This has been an incredible discussion. I really, really appreciate it. And after everything you've done for the film, to do this too is just, I'm very grateful. So I guess if anyone who hasn't voted, make sure you vote. That's all I can say.
Vote, and then go volunteer somewhere.
I thought you were going to
if you don't vote, I will find out about it. And believe me when I tell you, you do not want to have to face me if you did not vote.
Vote like life depends on it, because for some people it does.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. And we'll see you again at the next event.
Okay, bye.
Bye.